In previous videos, we explained that both back-office and customer-facing applications have increasingly demanding requirements in terms of user interface and user experience, which led to the emergence of a new concept, the design system. We saw that application development requires working together with graphic designers, who are the ones most involved in the definition of that design system and its use on our screens. Then, we focused on the back-office application to show how we already had a default design system. Later on, we saw the different players involved in its implementation, starting with the default master panel, followed by the default theme, and everything that the work with pattern already used from all that, through the classes it defined in that theme. From there we saw how everything could start to be customized, creating new classes and applying them to the form controls, or changing the existing classes to keep consistency with the design of the pattern screens, ensure responsiveness, and so on. But when we had to design our own screens, those we created from scratch, we had nothing to fall back on, but try to copy what the work with element made. In real life, for these cases, we'll have graphic designers. Let's suppose that we've asked our graphic designer to design a screen for the back office to show the information of a country with its tourist attractions, just like the one we implemented manually, but without the cities. Actually, in real life, we would never have implemented it from scratch if we had a graphic designer. Let's look at the steps we would have taken if we had known how. To make it simple, we ask him or her to design initially only the master panel for the back office and that particular screen. But actually, it'll also adapt our work with screens, possibly changing colors, fonts, and so on. And of course, he will design the home page of the back office. The designer uses the Sketch tool for his work, because it's a design tool to which you can add a GeneXus plugin that will do the amazing things we'll see next. It automatically integrates the design to our KB, and will even create objects. So, the designer creates the master page and panel design that we asked for in Sketch. To do so, some guidelines must be followed, so that the subsequent integration with GeneXus is simple and efficient. Once the design is completed, it's shown to us for confirmation. In this case, we'll be sent this link so that we can see the screens, as we don't have a Sketch user account. This is what the master page will look like. And this is the appearance of the country's attractions panel that will replace this other one. When we accept it, using that plugin we were talking about, it creates a GX Sketch extension file, which is the one sent to us. What we do next is import it into our KB. How? By selecting Sketch Import in our KB. There we must indicate the location of the GX Sketch file sent to us by the designer, and check that we want to import web panels. Also, we must indicate if all the classes that it will create to define the control's design and behavior will be imported as a new theme object, or if we want them to be integrated into the Carmine theme. We want to do the latter, so that everything is integrated into our back office. On the left, it shows everything that will be imported. For example, we see two web panels. The first one will correspond to the master panel. Here we can see the preview. And here, it indicates the controls that it will contain. It'll have a header table, which will contain an image control, and another table to specify the menu with the three options presented as text blocks. Then another table for the recent links, one for the content placeholder, and a last one for the footer. We can also see the corresponding HTML code. Then, the same thing in the next panel. It'll create a grid, which, as we'll see, will be horizontal, and a stencil control, precisely so as not to repeat this piece of design. We can see it here. It'll also import the necessary images. For example, these are to be able to run the panel with fixed data and show loaded attractions, which then the developers will have to replace with those in our application's database. Here we see the fonts that will be used in this design. And finally, all the classes that will be added to our theme. If new colors had been defined, they would be shown here too. Since we want to import all this, we press OK. Note that these two folders were created. Here's the stencil we had identified for the card, showing a photo, name, and category of the tourist attraction. And here is a data provider that will load with fixed data the 3 attractions that we saw in the preview. And below is the web panel that implemented the master page. And here's the one that implemented the detail of the country. If we open the first one, we see that all its visual content is already created. And the same if we open the second one. However, what the Sketch import program doesn't do yet, because it's still under development, but will do in the future, is to import this panel as a master page. Note that it imported it as a common web page. Then we'll have to change its type. Remember that in RKB, the web objects were using the default master page, which we had customized a bit. Let's take advantage of the fact that we have it open to copy the content placeholder for the new one, which we have just set as master page. So it'll require to have this control in its form. Otherwise, we will not be allowed to save the object. We copy it in the place left by the designer for this purpose. Here we see the header table, which we had seen before importing. Here's the recent links one, and here that of the footer. We see that it was assigned this class, which was imported into our Carmine theme. If we open it and look for the class for the header table, that has this background color specified, we can see it here. With the import, all these classes of tables were created that were not there before. The fonts specified in Sketch should also have been created below here. This will be done in future versions. For now, we have to import them explicitly. We indicate which folder they're in, and that we want them to be incorporated into the Carmine theme. And there they are. We save the new master panel, and now we must have a country detail panel loaded into it. Before running it, note that a horizontal grid has been inserted. Even though the 3 columns per horizontal page have not been specified correctly just yet. This is because the import function from Sketch for web panels is still not fully implemented, so we change it. We could also customize it to first test how it would look if the grid was not horizontal, but standard, although with 3 columns. Let's try it. We see that this panel is loading with fixed data, which are the ones imported with Sketch, in order to immediately see how it would look. That's why we see the country name France and a combo that allows choosing between none and Paris. Also, we see 3 tourist attractions that are hard-coded, that is, specified manually. Of course, We'll have to modify all this to take the data from the database. And maybe change some things like the spacing between controls, since this import is not pixel perfect, as it will be soon when it matures. But for starters, directly importing the design has saved us a lot of work. Let's think about the difference between this and implementing everything from scratch. Obviously, if our intention is to turn the master page of this panel into the master page of the entire back office, the base color of the rest of the application should be this one, and not the previous one. Not only the application bar, but all actions and buttons should take this other color. If we look at the class of the table that implements the application bar in the default master page, we see that the background color was this, base. We need to change it. Where is it configured? In the color palette associated with the Carmine theme with the same name. So there, we change its color to the one the designers used in the application bar of the new master page. We copy the code, double-click here, and paste it in this other place. And that's it. We save and run. What if now we want to change the master page of these web panels? We go to GeneXus. This is the component that shows the attractions in a horizontal grid, and when we click on the name of one of them, it opens this other one, which shows the information of the attraction. If we click on its country name, it opens the last one, which is the one we'll replace later with the new one. So, let's change the master page of this one and of the previous one. Let's try it. We refresh, and here we see the master page perfectly applied. And also, for the previous panel, the one that called this last one. Not so for the first one, because we didn't change it. Now we'll want to replace this panel with the new one, but loading all its data from the database. The first thing we must do is receive the country identifier as a parameter. We add the variable to the object, which will be based on the attribute with the same name. Then, we see that the variable country name should have the same data type as that of the country name attribute, which is name, so we change it. This web panel doesn't have a base table, as we'll show. So, we have to find in the database the name of the country received in a parameter. For this, we can program a for each command in the start event. In the country table, we'll look for the record whose country ID is equal to the parameter variable. And, for that record, we assign the value of the country name attribute to the variable of the country name form. Another way to achieve the same would have been to use the inline find formula instead of the for each command. Now let's remove the initial value it was using because we don't need it anymore. We must load this combo box variable with the cities of that country. Therefore, we must change the type of control so that it's a combo whose values are loaded dynamically from the database and not statically as before. The values taken by the combo will be those of the city name attribute, and the descriptions will be the same. City name, it'll save internally and display the same. But also, we don't want to show all the cities, but only those of the country received in a parameter. We leave the property set to true to add the empty item, that none value that we saw at runtime. Well, now we need to change what is shown on the grid and also filter it. As we see, the grid has no specified base transaction, no order, and no conditions. It doesn't even have attributes, but elements of an STT that was created by importing from Sketch. So, this grid will load a collection of that SDT. For each item, its elements will be shown according to the stencil design that we saw. Here the SDT is defined, with one element that will store an image of the attraction, another will store the name, and another one the category. These elements will replace these generic variables in the grid stencil. But the one that will actually return a data collection from this SDT with the attractions loaded will be this data provider imported with Sketch. The only thing we have to do is modify it so that the items are loaded from the attractions in the database and not from these fixed data. So we leave these three groups with comments and add one that will be variable, specifying that we'll take the data from the attraction-based transaction, filtering by country identifier, when it's not empty, and by city name, also when it's not empty. We must define both variables in the parm rule. But first, for each record found, we want an item to be added to the resulting collection with the value of the attraction photo, its name, and the name of its category. Now let's define the two parameters that this data provider must receive when it's invoked. And now let's look at its invocation. It's done in the load event, of course. We see that we have a for_in command that runs through each item in the collection returned by the data provider and loads it into the grid. This is where we'll have to send it the parameters so that it filters by country and city. The only thing left to do is to invoke this web panel instead of the one we had. That is to say, instead of this one, this other one. We save and run. Let's select this attraction and see the information about its country, France. There we see deployed the three attractions that we have from France in the database, and the two cities, and filtering by Paris, we see two attractions, and by Nice, one attraction. If we choose another attraction, from China this time, we see the three attractions we have in China. With this small example, we can have an idea of how the incremental development process of an application will be, both in terms of logic and design, and to what extent we should work as a team with people with different skills.